The photograph was still on my phone the morning everything changed. My father and me at the end of the aisle, his face turned slightly toward the camera, tears on his cheeks, genuine and unguarded in the way his face almost never was. I had looked at it probably 30 times in 3 months. I had sent it to relatives. I had made it my lock screen for 2 weeks before my husband teased me about it gently and I switched it back to something else. I'm Sophie Hale, Sophie Delaney now, though I was Hale for 32 years, and that name carried specific weight in Gardenville, Tennessee, where my father had been the principal of Gardenville Regional High School for 16 years and where his name meant something particular: uprightness, consistency, the kind of moral steadiness that a small southern town elects to its institutions and then leans on hard. I had leaned on it my entire life. My father, Martin Hale, was the person I had organized myself around, not the way children organize around permissive parents, but the way children organize around authority they have completely internalized. His opinion of me was the measurement I reached for when I needed to know if I was doing well. His approval was the room I had been trying to earn my way into since I was old enough to understand what approval meant. He had walked me down the aisle in September. He had cried. I had believed, in that moment, that I understood exactly who he was and what I meant to him. The call that dismantled that understanding came on a Tuesday in December, 3 months after the wedding, on a quiet afternoon when I was doing paperwork at my desk at the pediatric therapy clinic where I worked. The number was local but not one I recognized. I almost let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was a woman named Carol. She spoke carefully, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed an opening but is uncertain about everything that comes after it. She said she was sorry to contact me this way. She said she had gone back and forth about whether to call at all. She said her daughter had asked her to. Her daughter's name was Iris. She was 14 years old. And she was, Carol told me, with the directness of someone who has decided that the only way through a thing is straight through it, Martin Hale's daughter. I put my pen down on my desk. Outside my office window, the December light was doing something quiet and specific to the parking lot, and I sat looking at it while Carol's voice continued, and I thought, the photograph is still my father's contact photo in my phone. I thought, he was crying. I thought, what was he crying about? My parents divorced when I was 11, which in Gardenville in the early 2000s was still the kind of event that carried social texture. People knew, were kind about it in the way that involves a degree of visible awareness, moved on but remembered. My mother, a woman named Ruth who taught piano and had the specific resilience of someone who had been disappointed by life and decided to be competent anyway, raised me mostly alone after that. My father remained present, dinners twice a week, every other weekend, the holidays negotiated with the careful diplomacy of two people who had decided that whatever had happened between them would not be weaponized against their child. I had respected that. I had been grateful for it. I had taken it as evidence of my father's fundamental decency. What I had not done, what I was, I now understand, temperamentally and emotionally unable to do for most of my life, was examine my father with any critical precision. He was the fixed point. He was Principal Hale, upright and consistent, the man teachers spoke about with the specific warmth reserved for bosses who maintain their humanity. He coached the academic bowl team. He mentored struggling students. He gave a speech at every graduation about integrity that people in Gardenville still quoted to me at the clinic, as though offering me a gift. I had never once questioned the speech. The first sign I missed arrived approximately 4 years before Carol's call, when my father began making excuses about a particular weekend in March. Every year, without fail, he had a conflict the third weekend of March, a conference, a school event, a family obligation on his side that was never specified and that I had never pressed him on. It had become an established feature of our calendar, like a recurring appointment I'd learned to plan around. I had noticed it. I had not asked about it. That is the behavioral pattern I had constructed over 20 years of loving my father. I noticed things that didn't quite fit, and then I found reasons not to examine them, because examining them too closely felt disloyal to the version of him I needed to believe in. The second sign came from my best friend Danielle, who had grown up in Gardenville and stayed, who worked at the county library and knew approximately everyone within a 15-mile radius. About 2 years before the wedding, Danielle had grown slightly strange around my father, not dramatically, not in any way I could have named directly, but with the specific oddness of someone navigating around a thing they know and have decided not to say. She deflected his name in conversation with a smoothness that looked, at the time, like sensitivity, and looks now, with full retrospective clarity, like practiced avoidance. I had attributed it to something old, a comment my father had made years earlier about her lifestyle that had landed badly. I had not considered that her avoidance might be informational rather than emotional. The third sign was in the wedding photographs. I had looked at them 30 times without seeing it. In the wide shot from the reception, the one where my father is standing at the edge of the room while my husband and I are dancing, he is looking at his phone. He looks, in that photo, like a man who is somewhere else. Who is conducting a different life in his pocket while the official life proceeds around him. I had seen the photo. I had thought, he's not really a dancing person. I had moved on. Even now, when I think back to that moment, something uncomfortable stirs, not just at what I missed but at how completely my love for him had functioned as a filter, removing everything that didn't belong to the image I needed. Carol spoke for 12 minutes on that Tuesday afternoon, and when she finished I asked her 2 questions. How old was Iris, and did she want to meet me? 14, Carol said. And yes, Iris had been the one to ask Carol to call. Iris had found me herself, had looked up the Hale family in Gardenville, had found my clinic's website and my name. She was 14 and she had done this on her own, which told me something about the particular quality of determination that child had developed. I said I needed some time. Carol said she understood. I wrote down her number in the margin of the paperwork I had been doing, insurance forms, clinical notes, and I sat at my desk for a while after the call and I thought about the 3rd weekend of March. I didn't call my father that evening. I sat with what I knew and turned it over, the way I had learned, in therapy and in professional training, to sit with difficult information before acting on it. My husband, James, came home to find me quiet at the kitchen table and asked what was wrong with the specific directness I loved about him. James didn't circle, didn't approach through social lubrication, just asked. I told him everything. He sat down across from me and listened without interrupting, which is also something I loved about him, and when I finished he said, "What do you need to know before you decide what to do?" That question was the right one. I needed to know if it was true. And I needed to know what my father had told this child, and her mother, about us. I called Danielle the next morning. There was a silence after I said Iris's name. A silence with architecture, with the specific weight of something that has been held for a long time and is relieved, finally, to be set down. How long have you known? I asked. 2 years, she said. A little more. Danielle had met Iris through a summer reading program at the library. Iris had a different last name, her mother's, and Danielle hadn't connected the dots immediately. But Iris had mentioned her father once, in passing, and the name had landed, and Danielle had done what anyone would do with the information. She had looked, verified, and then spent 2 years unable to figure out what to do with what she found. She had told herself it wasn't her place. She had told herself maybe it wasn't the same Martin Hale. She had told herself that if Sophie needed to know, Sophie would find out. All of those things were understandable and none of them had been the right choice and Danielle knew it, which was why her voice on the phone had the particular quality of someone confessing rather than reporting. She's a good kid, Danielle said, quietly. Iris. She's a really good kid, Sophie. I sat with that for a moment. A 14-year-old girl who had found her half-sister's name on a clinic website and asked her mother to make a call. A really good kid. Did she know about me? I asked. Did she know I existed? She knew your father had a daughter, Danielle said. She didn't know much else. He didn't talk about you. He didn't talk about me. I had spent 32 years trying to earn a place in my father's approval and he had a second daughter he hadn't mentioned to her. We had both been kept separate. We had both been maintained in ignorance of each other. We had both been managed. That realization, that Iris and I were not in different categories, that we had both been handled, arrived with a specific cold clarity that I felt in my chest rather than my thoughts. He hadn't hidden Iris from me because she was the secret. He had hidden both of us from each other because the compartmentalization was the point. Because a man whose identity requires a particular image cannot allow the different rooms of his life to see each other. I had spent my whole life in one of those rooms. I had never been shown the door. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. My work is built on the discipline of accurate observation, of watching children move through tasks and environments and understanding, from what I see, what is actually happening beneath the surface. I applied that discipline to the next 2 weeks of my life. I did not call my father. I told James what I was doing and why, and he gave me the space to do it without trying to accelerate it, which required a restraint on his part that I have never forgotten. I requested my parents' divorce records through the county clerk's office, public record, available to anyone. The divorce had been finalized in 1995, when I was 11. The grounds listed were irreconcilable differences, which told me nothing specific. But the filing date was March of that year. The third weekend of March. I sat with that arithmetic. My parents' divorce had been filed in March. My father's recurring March conflict had begun. I counted back, estimating, approximately the year after the divorce was finalized. As though the date meant something to him that he had chosen to honor, privately, every year since. Iris was 14. She had been born in June, 14 years ago. My parents' marriage had ended when I was 11. The timeline placed Iris's conception in the last year of my parents' marriage. I thought about my mother. About Ruth, who played piano and had the resilience of someone who had been disappointed and decided to be competent anyway. I thought about what she had known and when she had known it, and whether the divorce that I had spent 21 years understanding as an irreconcilable difference had a more specific name. I called my mother on a Friday evening. I told her what I had found. There was a silence on the phone that I recognized immediately, not surprise. Relief. The specific relief of something finally, after a very long time, being said out loud. I knew there was someone, my mother said. I didn't know about a child. She hadn't told me because she hadn't known the full extent of it. And because she had decided, at 11 years into a divorce, that what was past and that her daughter's relationship with her father was her daughter's to manage. I understood that choice. It was the choice of a woman who had moved on and did not want to be the one to burn something down on her daughter's behalf. But the cost of that choice had been carried by me, in the form of 32 years of organizing my life around an incomplete version of my father. The peace I needed, the peace that made everything structurally clear, came from Carol herself, in a second conversation I requested the following week. Carol was not, I discovered, a woman who had participated in the deception with full enthusiasm. She had been 26 when she met Martin, who had told her his marriage was effectively over. She had believed him, because people believe what they want to believe, and because Martin Hale was a convincing man whose professional manner carried into his personal life a confidence that read as honesty. By the time she understood the actual situation, that the marriage had not been over, that a divorce was only beginning, she was pregnant. She had asked him to tell his family. He had promised to, repeatedly, over the course of 14 years. Every year she asked. Every year he said soon, when Iris was older, when the time was right, when things settled. She had waited, and the waiting had become the shape of their arrangement, and Iris had grown up knowing she had a father who visited and a sister whose name she wasn't allowed to know, and a life that existed in a compartment that was never going to be opened. Iris had opened it herself. That detail lived in me for a long time, a 14-year-old who had grown tired of waiting for adults to tell the truth and had decided to find it herself. Who had searched a name on the internet and found a clinic website and asked her mother to make a call. There was something in that determination that I recognized, and the recognition was complicated, because what I recognized was a version of the thing I had been trying not to be my entire life, a person who refused to accept the incomplete version and went looking for the rest. I had been afraid to look. Iris, at 14, had not been. I called my father on a Sunday morning in January, 4 weeks after Carol's call. I asked if I could come by. He said of course. His voice was warm and easy, the voice of a man who had no reason to expect anything other than a normal Sunday visit from his daughter. I drove to his house alone. James had offered to come. I had said no, because I understood that what was about to happen was between Martin Hale and the version of him I had carried my entire life, and that it needed to be just the two of us in the room. He had made coffee. He was pleased to see me. He asked about James, about the clinic, about whether we'd decided on holiday plans. I answered briefly. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, the same table I had done homework at as a child, where he had helped me study for tests, where we had eaten dinners during my weekend visits, and I put Carol's name on the table. He heard the name and something happened in his face. Not a specific expression, more the absence of one, a blankness that arrived very quickly over what had been warmth and settled there with a finality that told me he had always known this moment was coming and had never decided how to meet it. Tell me about Iris, I said. He tried several things in the following hour. He tried partial acknowledgement, that there had been a situation, that it had been complicated, that he had handled it badly. He tried appeal, that he had wanted to protect me, that I had just gotten married, that the timing had never seemed right. He tried, briefly, the authority that had always functioned in our relationship, a kind of measured gravitas that indicated he would decide when and how the difficult things were discussed. That authority had no purchase on me anymore. I had come to the table knowing exactly what I knew, and the knowing had taken from him the resource he'd always relied on with me, my willingness to accept his version. You walked me down the aisle, I said. You cried. And Iris was at home somewhere not knowing my name. Not knowing if you had ever mentioned her to me. He said, I was going to tell you. You told Carol that for 14 years. He didn't answer. She's 14, I said. She found me herself. A 14-year-old found me herself because you wouldn't. His face, in that moment, did something I hadn't seen it do in 32 years. It gave up. Not dramatically, not with tears or collapse. It simply stopped performing. The principal's face, the moral compass face, the face that Gardenville had been reading for 16 years as steadiness and integrity, stopped holding its arrangement, and underneath it was what was actually there. A man who had been exhausted by his own deception for a very long time and had no idea how to stop without losing everything he had constructed. I understood, in that moment, that the image had cost him something too. That living inside a performance of yourself requires a specific sustained effort, and that the effort had left him genuinely tired in ways he hadn't admitted to anyone, including himself. That complexity did not excuse what he had done. But it made him human in a way the performance never had. I need you to call Carol today, I said. I need you to tell Iris, in whatever way she needs to hear it, that you're sorry. Not to me. To her. She's the one who's been waiting. He nodded. It was a small, exhausted nod, the nod of a man for whom agreement was now the only available motion. I stood up. I looked at my father, at the man who had made me and walked me down an aisle and cried, and who had been carrying a secret the entire time that belonged to a 14-year-old girl who had deserved to know her sister's name. I need time, I said. I don't know how much. I drove home. James was there. I sat in the kitchen and told him everything, and he made tea without being asked, which is one of the things about a person you know you chose correctly. And then, 2 days later, in a moment I hadn't planned and which arrived before I was ready for it, I texted Carol and asked if Iris would like to meet. We met at a coffee shop in February. Neutral ground, Carol's suggestion, which I appreciated. I arrived first and sat facing the door, and when Carol and Iris came in I saw her before she saw me, which gave me a moment to simply look. She was tall for 14, Martin's height, which I had always thought of as mine. She had his coloring too, the same dark eyes, the same way of holding her chin slightly up that I had always interpreted, in myself, as confidence and now understood was just the particular angle we had both inherited. She was wearing a blue jacket and she looked, crossing the coffee shop floor toward me, like a person who had decided to be brave about something. I stood up. We looked at each other. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. We sat down. Carol ordered coffee. Iris ordered hot chocolate and then seemed briefly embarrassed about it, which made me want to tell her that hot chocolate was a legitimate choice, which I did, which made her almost smile. We talked for 2 hours. Carol stayed for the first 40 minutes and then, with a discretion that I found quietly graceful, said she had an errand and would be back. She left us alone, which is what Iris had come for, I think, not to have the conversation mediated by adults but to have it as the two people it most concerned. Iris asked me about my work. She was interested in a specific and genuine way. She had looked up pediatric occupational therapy, she said, because she wanted to understand what I did before we met. That preparation, that research, that determination to show up informed, I recognized it. It was mine. We had developed it separately, in different houses, in response to the same father, and we had arrived at the coffee shop with the same approach to an uncertain situation. She asked, toward the end, whether I was angry at her. No, I said. Not even close. Are you angry at my mom? I thought about Carol, 26 years old, told a marriage was effectively over, pregnant before she understood what she'd walked into, waiting 14 years for a man to keep a promise he had never truly intended to keep. No, I said. Are you angry at your dad? I sat with that for a moment. Yes, I said. But it's complicated. He's still my dad. She nodded. He's still my dad too, she said. Even though. That phrase contained more than most complete sentences do. She had arrived, at 14, at the same complicated truth I was still working toward, that the person who failed you doesn't stop being the person who made you, and you have to find somewhere to put both of those facts at the same time. We left the coffee shop in late afternoon light, the February air thin and cold, and we hugged at the parking lot, a brief, slightly awkward hug that had in it all the uncertainty of two people who are brand new to each other and are also, somehow, not strangers. My father called me in March. He said he had met with Iris, Carol had facilitated it, and Iris had gone, and it had been, by his account, one of the hardest conversations of his life. He did not ask for absolution. He asked how I was. I told him honestly, working on it. We are still working on it. The relationship between my father and me has been remade from the ground up, without the idealization that structured the original, and it is smaller and more honest and requires a kind of sustained deliberateness that the easy version never did. Some weeks I manage it better than others. He has retired early, the story became, in Gardenville's way, known, because things always do, and he is living, I think, with the specific discomfort of a man whose public identity has been separated from its foundation and who must now figure out who he is without it. I don't have uncomplicated feelings about that. But I have honest ones. Iris and I text now. Frequently, in the unguarded way that teenagers text, rapidly, with irregular punctuation, about small things. She is doing a school project on careers in health science. She wants to know if she can shadow me at the clinic sometime. She sent me a photograph last month of a puzzle she'd finished, 2,000 pieces, a map of the world, and the text underneath said, "Took me 3 weeks but I finished it." I stared at that text for a long time. I thought about what it means to finish something that takes a long time and requires sustained attention and rewards you, in the end, with a picture of the whole world laid out and legible. I texted back, "I'm proud of you." She sent back 3 exclamation points, which is the 14-year-old version of the thing I felt. James and I have talked about children, more concretely now than before, the conversations having a different quality since Iris, as though she has recalibrated something about what family means to both of us. What it can be made of. What unexpected shape it can take when the shapes you expected don't materialize. The wedding photograph is no longer my father's contact photo. It's just a photograph now, one I can look at without the weight of everything I didn't know pressing against the image. He was crying. I think that was real. I think you can love someone and deceive them simultaneously, and the love can be genuine and the deception can be genuine, and both can be true at the same time, which is one of the more uncomfortable things I have learned about being human. The photograph of the blue jacket, Iris, crossing the coffee shop floor, chin slightly up, deciding to be brave, that one I look at more. Some families are the ones you come from. Some are the ones that find you across a search bar and a clinic website, in the determined, unasked for form of a 14-year-old who got tired of waiting for the adults to tell the truth and decided to find it herself. I got a sister out of my father's worst choices. I am still deciding what to do with that. Most days, I decide to be grateful. The revelation that reframes everything in this story is not that Martin had another daughter. It is that he had been managing two daughters in the same way, keeping them both in separate rooms, feeding each a version of himself calibrated for that room, and relying on both of their love for him to prevent either from looking through the walls. Sophie had spent 32 years inside Martin's official version, the upright man, the principal, the moral compass. She had organized her emotional life around earning his approval, which was the approval of a performance. The performance was convincing because it was continuous and because Martin was genuinely capable of the qualities he displayed, the mentorship, the consistency, the speech about integrity he gave at every graduation. He was not a wholly invented person. He was a person who had allowed one real dimension of himself to be the entire presentation, and who had maintained that narrowness with great discipline over a very long time. Iris had spent 14 years inside Martin's other version, the visiting father, present but contained, warm but bounded, a man who promised that one day the compartments would open and never opened them. Both daughters had been waiting, in different ways, for a fullness he was incapable of providing, because the fullness would require him to be known whole, and being known whole was incompatible with the image. This is the central psychological mechanism the story examines: identity as performance sustained by information control. Martin's power over both his daughters depended entirely on what each of them knew. Sophie's idealization required her ignorance of Iris. Iris's limited relationship with her father required her ignorance of Sophie's full significance to him. He was the only person in possession of the complete picture, and that asymmetry was not incidental, it was structural. It was how he maintained control over two relationships that could not be allowed to see each other. What dismantled it was exactly what Martin could not control: Iris's agency. A 14-year-old who had grown up watching adults defer to a man's timeline decided to stop deferring. She searched a name. She found a website. She asked her mother to make a call. The entire architecture of Martin's information management was undone not by confrontation or investigation but by a child who simply refused to keep waiting. That is the twist the story earns, not that Martin had a secret, but that the secret was ended by the person he had most wronged and least credited. Iris is the moral center of this story. Not Sophie, who is its narrator. Not Martin, who is its subject. Iris, who at 14 demonstrated more courage than the adults in her life had managed over 14 years. Sophie's version of the failure was quieter and more sympathetic, the third weekend of March, noticed and unremarked upon. Danielle's avoidance, interpreted as old sensitivity. The photograph at the reception, the man on his phone at the edge of the room, the daughter who saw it and thought he's not a dancing person. These are not failures of intelligence. They are the cost of love that has been organized around a single person's approval, love that cannot afford to see clearly because seeing clearly might destroy the thing it depends on. The relationship Sophie arrives at with her father by the story's end is not reconciliation in its full form. It is something more honest and more durable, a relationship remade without the idealization, smaller and more effortful and built on accurate information rather than a performance. That is harder. It is also real in a way the original wasn't, and realness is what she had been looking for all along without knowing the thing she was looking for had a price. The image I keep returning to is Iris, crossing the coffee shop floor in a blue jacket, chin slightly up, deciding to be brave. She is 14. She has spent her entire conscious life inside a partial story, told she has a father who visits, a sister whose name she isn't allowed to know, a family that exists in a compartment that is always about to open and never does. She has watched adults defer to a man's timeline for 14 years. And at some point, quietly, without drama, on her own, she decided to stop waiting. She searched a name. She found a website. She asked her mother to make a call. I think about what that took. Not the logistics, those are simple enough. I think about the internal decision, the moment a 14-year-old chose her own need for truth over the comfort of waiting for an adult to provide it. The moment she decided that if no one was going to open the door, she would find the door herself. Most of us take much longer to arrive at that decision. Some of us never do. We wait for the right moment. We wait for the adults to sort it out. We wait for the information to come to us rather than going toward it, because going toward it means accepting that it won't arrive on its own, which means accepting that the people who should have told us already have chosen not to. Sophie had been waiting 32 years. Iris had been waiting 14. Iris stopped first. There is something in that, something about what it costs to grow up with an incomplete story, and what it costs more to simply accept the incompleteness, that I think is worth sitting with long after the story ends. What are we waiting to be told? And who decided we should wait?